My house, my rules, was the text message that greeted me as my wife Sarah and I stood on our front porch at 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, still wearing our travel clothes from our flight back from Maui. My name is Marcus Chen. I'm 29 years old, and I work as a software engineer for a tech startup in Portland, Oregon. What was supposed to be the happiest week of our lives had just become the moment I realized my mother-in-law had declared war on our marriage. I tried my key in the lock 3 times before the reality sank in. The deadbolt had been changed completely. Sarah was fumbling with her phone, reading the message from her mother Diane over and over, her face growing paler with each word. "She can't just, this is our apartment," Sarah whispered, though we both knew it wasn't technically true. The lease was in Diane's name, something she'd insisted on when we moved in together 2 years ago, because our credit wasn't established. Enough. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't pound on the door. I simply pulled out my phone and took a photo of the changed locks, the timestamp clearly visible. Then I called an Uber and told the driver to take us to the nearest hotel. Sarah looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Aren't you going to call her? Aren't you going to fight this?" she asked. I just smiled and said, "Sometimes the best move is the one they don't see coming." What Diane didn't know was that I'd been preparing for something like this since the day I met her. Sarah and I had been together for 4 years when we finally got married. We met in college at Oregon State, both studying computer science, though she eventually switched to graphic design. I was immediately drawn to her intelligence and creativity, the way she could solve problems from angles I'd never considered. She was everything I wanted in a partner: brilliant, kind, and fiercely independent. Her mother was another story entirely. From our first meeting, Diane Wheeler made it clear that no one would ever be good enough for her daughter. She was 52, worked as a real estate agent, and had built her entire identity around controlling every aspect of Sarah's life. When Sarah's father died in a car accident when she was 16, Diane became even more protective, viewing any relationship Sarah had as a threat to their bond. The warning signs were there from the beginning. During our first Christmas together, Diane gave Sarah an expensive necklace and me a $10 gas station gift card. When Sarah got a promotion at her design firm, Diane suggested she should quit and come work at the real estate office instead. When we announced our engagement, her first question wasn't congratulations, it was, "Are you sure you've thought this through?" But the real power play came when we started looking for our own place. Every apartment we applied for mysteriously fell through. Applications would be accepted, then suddenly rejected for vague reasons. It took me 3 months to figure out that Diane was calling landlords and poisoning the well, telling them we were financially unstable and irresponsible. "It's just temporary," Sarah had said when her mother offered to co-sign a lease on a 2-bedroom apartment in her building, "just until we save up enough for a down payment." I should have said no then, should have insisted we find another way. But Sarah was stressed, and I thought maybe this could be a chance for Diane and me to build a better relationship. I was wrong. Living in Diane's building meant constant supervision. She had a key, of course, for emergencies. She'd drop by unannounced to bring Sarah lunch, always when I was at work. She'd rearrange our furniture when we were out, claiming she was just helping. She'd leave passive-aggressive notes about noise levels, though we were easily the quietest tenants in the building. The breaking point should have been when she went through our mail and opened our wedding planning correspondence, then called vendors to clarify details we'd already settled. Or when she showed up to our engagement party and spent the entire evening telling guests about Sarah's ex-boyfriend from high school and how wonderful he was doing in medical school. But I kept my mouth shut, kept smiling, kept thinking that eventually she'd come around. Sarah was caught in the middle, trying to keep peace between us, and I didn't want to force her to choose sides. That was my mistake, thinking this was about territory instead of control. 3 months before our wedding, Diane made her position crystal clear. She cornered me in the laundry room of our building and said, "You know this marriage won't last, right? Sarah's too good for you. She'll figure it out eventually, and when she does, I'll be here to pick up the pieces." She smiled sweetly and added, "Nothing personal, Marcus. You seem like a nice enough boy. You're just not husband material." That night, I did something I'd never done before. I called my brother David in Sydney. David was 8 years older, a financial consultant who'd moved to Australia right after college and never looked back. He'd always been the adventurous one, the one who took risks while I played it safe. "You sound miserable, little brother," he said after I explained the situation. You know there's a whole world outside of Portland, right? It's not that simple, I replied. Sarah's career is here, her life is here. Her mother is here, David corrected. There's a difference. Look, I've got connections at tech companies in Sydney. The startup scene here is exploding. If you ever want to make a change, let me know. I thanked him but dismissed the idea. At the time, 2 weeks before our wedding, I made a discovery that changed everything. I was helping Sarah organize her old college papers when I found a folder labeled Job Applications from 3 years ago. Inside were acceptance letters from design firms in Seattle, San Francisco, and Austin. All positions Sarah had never mentioned to me. When I asked her about them, she looked embarrassed. I applied to a bunch of places when I was feeling restless, she admitted. But Mom convinced me it was too risky to leave Portland. She said I'd regret giving up my position here for something unknown. She paused. The Austin job was amazing, Marcus. Creative? Director position at a firm that specialized in sustainable architecture. I've always regretted not taking it. That night I lay awake thinking about opportunities lost and choices made out of fear instead of hope. I thought about David's offer, about the life Sarah and I could build if we weren't constantly navigating around Diane's manipulations. I thought about the kind of marriage I wanted, one built on partnership and possibility, not survival and compromise. I started making quiet preparations. First, I reached out to David and asked him to send me information about the tech market in Sydney. Then I quietly updated my resume and began networking with Australian companies through LinkedIn. I researched visa requirements for skilled workers and their spouses. I looked into Sarah's industry and found that Sydney had a thriving design community focused on sustainable and innovative architecture, exactly what she'd always been passionate about. I didn't tell Sarah about any of this, not because I was being secretive, but because I wanted to have concrete options before presenting what would essentially be a complete life change. If we were going to do this, it had to be done right. The wedding itself was beautiful. Despite Diane's best efforts, she'd tried to change the catering menu without consulting us, invited additional guests we'd never approved, and gave a toast that spent more time talking about Sarah's childhood than our future, together. But Sarah looked radiant, and for those few hours, nothing else mattered. We honeymooned in Maui, 7 days of pure bliss. No Diane, no interruptions, no passive-aggressive comments or unexpected visits. Just Sarah and me, talking about our dreams for the future. On our last night, as we watched the sunset from our hotel balcony, Sarah said something that stuck with me. I wish we could just stay here forever. Start fresh somewhere where no one has expectations about who we should be. What if we could? I asked. She laughed. Right. With what money? And our jobs? And my mom would literally lose her mind. I almost told her then about the research I'd been doing, the opportunities I'd found, but something held me back. Maybe intuition. Maybe the sense that this conversation was happening exactly when it needed to. The flight back to Portland was delayed by 3 hours due to weather. We finally landed at 1:20 p.m., exhausted and eager to get home to start our married life together. The Uber driver was chatty, asking about our trip, congratulating us on our marriage. Nothing like coming home to your own place, he said cheerfully as he dropped us off. If only he'd known. I stood on that porch, looking at the changed locks, reading Diane's text message, and felt something shift inside me. Not anger. Anger would have been unproductive. Clarity. For the first time in 4 years, I saw the situation exactly as it was. Diane was never going to accept our marriage, never going to stop trying to control Sarah's life, and never going to allow us to build the kind of partnership we both wanted. At the hotel that night, while Sarah called her mother and tried to understand what had happened, I sent 3 emails. One to David asking if his job offer was still available, one to a visa consultant I'd found online, requesting an urgent consultation, and one to a moving company, asking for quotes on international relocations. Sarah's conversation with her mother lasted 2 hours. I could hear Diane's voice through the phone, explaining that she'd changed the locks because she'd heard strange noises and was worried about break-ins. She'd meant to give us new keys but had forgotten. It was all a misunderstanding. She'd have new keys made tomorrow. She wants us to come over tonight, Sarah said after hanging up. She's made dinner. She wants to apologize and give us the new keys. I was sitting at the hotel room desk with my laptop open, looking at job listings in Sydney. "What do you want to do?" I asked. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing her travel clothes, looking more tired than I'd ever seen her. "I don't know anymore, Marcus. I'm so tired of this. Every time I think we've found our footing, something happens. Some new crisis or emergency or misunderstanding that somehow always involves my mother." I closed my laptop and sat beside her. "What if we didn't have to deal with it anymore?" "What do you mean?" I took a breath. "What if we just left? Started over somewhere else?" She looked at me like I was suggesting we fly to Mars. "Marcus, we can't just leave. We have jobs, responsibilities. Your mother will be fine," I said gently. "She was fine before you were born, and she'll be fine if we move to another city. The question is, will we be fine if we stay?" That night I told Sarah everything. About the research I'd been doing, the peer opportunities in Australia, the visa process, the design firms that specialized in exactly the kind of work she'd always wanted to do. I showed her David's emails, the job listings, the information I'd gathered about Sydney's startup scene. "You've been planning this?" she asked, though she didn't sound angry, more amazed than anything. "I've been preparing for possibilities," I said. "I wanted to know what our options were before we talked about it." She was quiet for a long time, scrolling through the information on my laptop. Finally, she said, "The Austin job I turned down 3 years ago, the one my mother convinced me not to take, I've regretted that decision every single day since then." The next morning, we didn't go to Diane's apartment for the keys. Instead, we had breakfast at a diner downtown and made lists, pros and cons of staying versus leaving, what we'd need to do if we decided to relocate, what we could afford to leave behind, and what we couldn't live without. By noon, we'd made our decision. I called David first. "Remember that job offer?" I said when he answered. "I'm interested." "About time," he laughed. "When can you start?" "How about next month?" There was a pause. "That's fast. What changed?" "Let's just say my mother-in-law helped clarify our priorities." David set up video interviews with 3 companies over the next week. 2 of them made offers immediately. The third, a fintech startup focused on sustainable investing, offered me a senior developer position with a 30% salary increase and full relocation assistance. Sarah reached out to design firms in Sydney and had similar success. Her portfolio, particularly her work on sustainable architecture projects, was exactly what several firms were looking for. Within 2 weeks, she had 3 job offers and decided to accept a position with a firm that specialized in eco-friendly urban planning. We didn't tell Diane any of this. Instead, we played along with her narrative. We accepted the new keys, thanked her for resolving the misunderstanding, and even had dinner with her twice that week. She was particularly pleased with herself, clearly believing she'd successfully reasserted control over our living situation and, by extension, our marriage. "I'm so glad we worked this out," she said over coffee one evening. "I was worried you two might do something dramatic like move out, but of course that would be silly. You could never afford a place as nice as this on your own." "You're probably right," I agreed, catching Sarah's eye across the table. We'd learned to communicate in glances and subtle nods, a married couple's secret language that Diane couldn't interpret. Meanwhile, we were systematically preparing for our departure. We opened Australian bank accounts remotely. We sold our furniture to online buyers, telling anyone who asked that we were downsizing. We shipped our most important belongings to David's address in Sydney, a box or 2 at a time so it wouldn't be obvious. The hardest part was staying calm when Diane made her usual comments about our relationship. She seemed emboldened by the lock incident, as if she'd won some decisive victory. She started making more frequent suggestions about how we should live our lives, who we should socialize with, what kind of financial decisions we should make. "You know, Marcus," she said one evening while Sarah was in the bathroom, "I've been thinking that maybe you should consider a different career path, something more stable than this startup nonsense. My friend Linda's husband is a manager at the Water Bureau. Very steady work, excellent benefits. I could put in a word." I smiled and thanked her for thinking of me, all while knowing that in 3 weeks I'd be starting a job in Sydney that would pay more than anything the Water Bureau could offer. 3 days before our departure, we had our final dinner with Diane. She'd made Sarah's favorite meal and was in an especially good mood, talking about plans for the upcoming holidays and how nice it would be to have us so close for family traditions. "I know things got off to a rocky start," she said, looking directly at me, "but I think we've found our rhythm now. This living arrangement is perfect for everyone. Sarah gets to stay close to family, and you two get the support of an experienced adult while you're still figuring things out. Sarah squeezed my hand under the table. We'd agreed that she would tell her mother about our move, but not until we were already gone. Not because we were afraid of confrontation, but because we knew Diane would try every manipulation in her considerable arsenal to stop us. "It's been an interesting year," I said diplomatically. "Oh, this is just the beginning," Diane replied. "I have so many ideas for how we can make this work even better. I was thinking maybe we could knock out the wall between your kitchen and living room, make the space more open. And I've been looking at vacation rentals for next summer. There's a lovely place on the coast that would be perfect for a family trip." After dinner, as we were getting ready to leave, Diane hugged Sarah tightly. "I love you so much, sweetheart. You know I only want what's best for you." "I know, Mom," Sarah replied. I could hear the tears in her voice, though Diane couldn't see them. The next morning, while Diane was at work, we loaded our remaining belongings into a rental van. It was mostly clothes and electronics. Everything else had already been shipped or sold. We left the apartment spotless, with the keys on the kitchen counter along with a letter Sarah had written. We were at the airport when Diane found the letter. My phone started ringing at 2:30 p.m., just as we were boarding our flight to Los Angeles, where we'd catch our connecting flight to Sydney. I let it go. To voicemail. It rang again, and again. By the time we were in our seats, I had 17 missed calls from Diane and 23 text messages. Sarah's phone was worse. 31 calls and messages that started with confusion and quickly escalated to panic and then to rage. We turned our phones off as the plane taxied to the runway. In Sarah's letter, she'd explained everything simply and clearly. We'd been offered opportunities in Australia that were too good to pass up. We were grateful for all Diane's support over the years, but it was time for us to build our own life together. We'd be in touch once we were settled, and we hoped she'd be happy for us. What she didn't say, but what Diane certainly understood, was that this was the natural consequence of the lock incident. You can't try to control someone's home and then be surprised when they find a new one. The flight to Sydney was 15 hours, giving us plenty of time to process what we'd done. Sarah cried for the first hour, not from regret, but from relief. "I feel like I can breathe for the first time in years," she said as we flew over the Pacific. David met us at the airport with champagne, and the biggest smile I'd ever seen. "Welcome to your new life," he said, embracing both of us. No mother-in-law drama for 7,000 miles in any direction. We stayed with David for our first month while we found an apartment in Surrey Hills, a vibrant neighborhood full of young professionals and artists. Our new place was smaller than what we'd had in Portland, but it was ours. Lease in our names, locks that only we had keys to, decisions that only we had to make. Both our jobs exceeded our expectations. My fintech startup was working on revolutionary applications for sustainable investing, exactly the kind of meaningful work I'd always wanted to do. Sarah's firm was involved in urban planning projects that would reshape Sydney's approach to eco-friendly development. We were both making more money than we'd ever made in Portland and doing work that felt significant. But the real difference was in our relationship. Without the constant stress of managing Diane's emotions and expectations, Sarah and I rediscovered what had drawn us together in the first place. We could make plans without worrying about hurting anyone's feelings. We could have conversations about our future without someone else's agenda creeping in. We could just be married, without having to perform being married for an audience of one. 3 months after we arrived, Sarah's mother finally called. We'd been exchanging emails sporadically, brief updates about our jobs and apartment, with carefully neutral responses from Diane that revealed nothing about her actual feelings. "I want to visit," she announced without preamble when Sarah answered the phone. That would be nice, Mom," Sarah said, though her expression suggested otherwise. "When were you thinking?" "Next month. I've already looked at flights. There's one that gets in on a Friday morning, and I could stay until the following Sunday. It would give us time to really talk." Sarah looked at me with panic in her eyes. I shook my head slightly and mouthed, "Your choice." "Actually, Mom, that timing doesn't work for us," Sarah said, her voice gaining strength. "Marcus and I are still settling in, and we both have important projects at work. Maybe we could plan something for later in the year." "Later in the year?" Diane's voice rose an octave. "Sarah, I'm your mother. I've been incredibly patient about this whole adventure of yours, but it's time to be realistic. You can't just run away to another country every time you want to avoid responsibility. I watched Sarah's face change, saw the moment she stopped being the daughter who needed to manage her mother's emotions and became the woman who'd chosen to build a life with me. "Mom," she said calmly, "I didn't run away from responsibility. I ran toward opportunity. And if you can't be happy for me, then maybe we need to take a longer break from talking." The conversation ended there. Diane hung up, and Sarah immediately started second-guessing herself. Maybe I was too harsh, she worried. Maybe I should have. "You were perfect," I interrupted. "You were honest and direct without being cruel. That's all you can do." That was 8 months ago. Since then, Diane has called twice. Once to inform us that she was selling the building where we used to live, and once to tell us that Sarah's cousin was getting married, and wouldn't it be nice if we could attend. Both calls lasted less than 5 minutes, and ended with vague promises to talk soon. Sarah is now pregnant with our first child, due in December. When we told Diane via email, her response was a single sentence. "Congratulations. I suppose you'll want me to visit when the baby comes." We haven't responded yet. We're still deciding how much of our lives we want to share with someone who views our happiness as a personal betrayal. Instead, we've built a new kind of family here. David and his wife Emma have become like siblings to us. Our colleagues have become friends, the kind of friends who invite you to barbecues and remember your birthday, and celebrate your victories without keeping score. We've also made friends with other expat couples, people who understand what it means to choose adventure over security, possibility over predictability. There's something special about friendships formed in a foreign country, bonds forged by shared experience and mutual support. Last week, Sarah and I were having coffee at our favorite cafe in Surrey Hills, watching the morning crowd of professionals and students and tourists flow past our window. Sarah was sketching ideas for a new sustainable housing project, and I was reviewing code for a mobile app that would help investors track the environmental impact of their portfolios. "Do you ever miss it?" Sarah asked suddenly. "Portland, I mean. Our old life." I thought about it carefully. "I miss some things," I said honestly. "I miss the food trucks and Powell's books and that hiking trail we used to love. But do I miss our old life? No. I don't miss walking on eggshells or making decisions based on other people's feelings or having someone else's insecurity cast a shadow over our relationship." Sarah nodded, her hand moving absently to her growing belly. "I keep thinking about what kind of mother I want to be," she said. "What kind of grandmother I want our kids to have." "Your mom loves you," I said gently. "In her own complicated way, she loves you. But love isn't always healthy, and it's definitely not always enough." "I know," she replied. "I just hope someday she understands that letting go doesn't mean losing everything. It means trusting that what you've built is strong enough to stand on its own." 3 days later, Sarah called her mother. They talked for an hour, the longest conversation they'd had since we left Portland. Diane cried, apologized, and admitted that changing the locks had been a mistake born of panic and possessiveness. She said she missed Sarah terribly and was proud of what we'd accomplished in Australia, even if she didn't understand it. She also asked if she could come visit when the baby was born. Sarah looked at me during the call, and I nodded. Some bridges are worth rebuilding, but only on equal terms. "You can visit," Sarah told her mother, "but we need to establish some ground rules first. This is our home, our family, our decisions. You're welcome here as our guest, but not as our manager." Diane agreed, though time will tell if she means it. Yesterday I got an email from my old boss in Portland. The startup I used to work for had been acquired by a major tech company, and several of my former colleagues had reached out to see if I was interested in coming back. The offer was substantial, nearly double what I'd been making when I left, plus equity and full relocation assistance. I showed the email to Sarah over dinner. She read it twice, then handed my phone back with a smile. "Tempting?" she asked. "Not even a little bit," I replied. "We've learned something important in these past months. Home isn't a place you're born into or a situation you inherit. It's something you choose, something you build with intention and defend with courage. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from what everyone else thinks you should want and choose what actually makes you happy. Our daughter will grow up knowing that she can live anywhere in the world, that love doesn't require proximity, and that sometimes the people who claim to want what's best for you are actually just afraid of losing control. She'll also grow up knowing that her parents chose each other every single day, not just on their wedding day, but every day since then, including the day they stood on a porch with changed locks and decided to change everything else instead. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting free.